Podcast Bites.
I certainly think it's very important that people realize that the ketones that they're seeing in their blood meter are really just a marker, and they need to figure out what their specific goals are and then figure out what target range helps them reach that goal. And that's why I like the glucose-ketone index better, because what you don't want is high blood sugar and high ketones, and you can actually have that, and that's a bad thing. What you want is that low glucose-ketone index, and for therapeutic applications, the closer to 1 or below you are, the better. For weight loss, you're usually quite successful, under 10.
You mentioned the high glucose and high ketones at the same time, Gillian, and this is my concern for those people that continue to eat higher amounts of carbs, not high carb, but maybe more to try to give themselves a little more flexibility. And then they take exogenous sources of ketones, either EKs or they use a ketone ester, which I've had both of those things. The esters are
those
wicked.
Esters are horrible.
The ester, they taste horrid, but they're wicked as far as how quick they get into the brain. And you feel like your brain's on fire. Have you used those as tools as part of your epilepsy management?
Absolutely. I have, and usually it's when I make a big mistake. So if I eat out and I haven't been absolutely meticulous about grilling the waiter as to exactly what's going to be on my steak, or I've overindulged in vegetables, if my brain is not feeling good, or if it is that time of the month for me and I know that my ketones are bottoming out, those are the times that I will supplement with exogenous ketones. And it is really, with the end in mind of keeping myself seizure free. I do believe that exogenous ketones have a role to play, especially therapeutically. And there's no question, there's some really good research coming out around the support around both epilepsy, but not just that, Alzheimer's as well. And I think ketone esters are going to definitely have a role to play in managing dementia. But in terms of everyday use, I am not a fan in terms of everyday use for a couple of reasons. And one of the main reasons that most people don't stop to think about is that, what is it that keeps our blood sugar in a healthy range? It's our insulin, right? Mm-hmm. That when our blood sugar is too high, we have insulin released in order to drive it out of our bloodstream and into our cells. Guess what happens when your ketones get too high? You have an insulin response to drive it out of your bloodstream. That is why it is the type 1 diabetics whose pancreases are not functioning who have the highest risk of ketoacidosis, because they don't have the ability of the insulin to bring that, those ketone levels down. So if you are pumping yourself full of ketones and not eating a low carb diet, who knows what that's doing and how much insulin that's actually causing. I don't think anybody, to the best of my knowledge, has done any research on that. So jury's out.
I so hope Dom picks that one up, because I love that idea of let's inject or have people take exogenous sources of ketones and then test like a 5-hour GTT with insulin. Mm-hmm. I would love to see that. I had not heard that before, Gillian, where the insulin goes up in response to the higher ketones, but that does make sense. And it could explain why some people that eat keto might still have some elevation in their insulin levels despite being very ketogenic. Again, I would love to see this looked into a little further.
Well, and the whole, insulin-glucagon loop is so fascinating. And, God, I wish I could go back now and do a degree in biochemistry.
Here, same here.
Instead, I just hang out listening to a lot of cool biochemists who have lots of interesting things to say. But I do not profess to understand the nuances. But what I do know, as someone also with lipedema, is that, you can have a great degree of insulin sensitivity, but still have insulin resistant cells. Mm-hmm. And that is something I think some people don't realize, is that when we talk about insulin resistance, we tend to talk about it in terms of the entire system. But that's not necessarily the case. You can have some cells that are exquisitely insulin sensitive and others that are not. And what is fascinating to me as someone with lipedema, which for your listeners, if you're not aware of this, it is a rare, maybe not so rare, adipose disease that affects about 11% of women and is typified by a very disproportionate laying down of fat below the waist. So I joke with Danny Vega that, my waist is 27 inches and my thighs are 27 inches, and so are his thighs. But his thighs are a lot more muscle than my thighs. My thighs are 40% fat. But when I've been living on keto for 4 years and I've lost a lot of weight, but it's almost all been above the waist because those cells are very, very glucagon sensitive. And so they let go of their cargo very quickly when there's a demand. Whereas the cells on my thighs are very, very resistant, and it takes an incredibly low level of insulin in order for me to actually access those. And, funny story, I was at Low-Carb USA, and Dave Feldman and I were having a chat about this, and I was telling him that I was going to do a month-long egg fast and see if I could mobilize some of the, adipocytes off my thighs. And we hashed it out, and we actually changed it from an egg fast to this full-on carnivore month because eggs actually have higher carbohydrates than steak does. So you don't think it's a much, but it's a little tiny bit. And for what I was hoping to do, I really needed to drive my insulin as low as I could possibly get. I got it down to 2.14.
Wow.
And that's so 13 in the Canadian, the way that we measure up here, but 2.14. And it did work. I lost 14 pounds. I lost 24 centimeters in 30 days.
And the lipedema got better?
And I did. Yeah, I lost about 4 centimeters off each thigh.
Wow.
And that was pretty significant because it's very difficult to come off there.
Yeah,
and of
that
course
doesn't
it did.
Budge.
No, and it still came off. My collarbones are all sticking out and all my ribs are visible, but it did come off a little bit from my thighs, and it's going to take time for that to happen. But I think this is one of the really fascinating frontiers, though, when we're talking about all of the biochemistry around hormonal control of fatty tissue. When you look at lipedema fatty tissue, it's very different from the fatty tissue of, other adipose areas on your body above the waist.
Avocado, motherfucker.